Okay, call me crazy, but I think album artwork is really important. And today I want to help you make better album covers for your new releases, whether you're an independent artist or you're an independent record label. I just want to talk about album covers and the role they play in the music industry today. You might be thinking, well, aren't they just like super tiny on our phones, on Spotify? Yes, that's true, and we'll talk about that. But they get a little bit bigger when they go to cassettes or CDs, or hopefully a 12 by 12 record in a record store. And my point in today's episode is this. We are such a visual society that most people will actually see your new album before they hear it. They'll see it on Spotify. They'll see it on your Instagram. They'll see it in a record store. And so for that reason, we need to take album artwork seriously. Today's episode is brought to you by Echo Creative. More on them in just a minute. This leads me to my first tip, which is take album artwork more seriously. I had an artist one time said to me, the music's done. Does the album artwork really matter? Can't we just throw whatever on there? That really hurt my feelings. Yes, it matters a lot. Just put as much creative energy as you put into the music into the album cover. That might seem crazy to you, but we do that with our songwriting. We do that with what session musicians or what studio we pick or what microphones we pick or what preamps we use, what plugins we use, how we mix it. We pan this a little bit to the left, add a touch more high end over here. Why aren't we doing the same type of creative approach to the album covers? I argue that we should be. Tip number 2 is to consider all of your deliverables. What are deliverables? It means the files that you're going to need when you're ready to prep this album cover, to prep this new release and release the album. You have your album covers, so the digital album cover, but you might also have the printable templates that you use for vinyl and for CDs or for cassettes. Another thing you might need, which is sometimes a bit of a hassle, is that most digital distributors require individual singles to have their own artwork. So if you're releasing a 10-song album in 6 months from now, but leading up to that release date, you're going to drop 3 singles from that album. Unfortunately, you can't use the artwork from the main album as the album covers for those singles. Most DSPs and digital distributors require that you have individual artwork for each single. So just consider all of these things. You also should have social media graphics and web banners that you use during the album campaign to promote the release. And each of these design elements, these opportunities for design, should work together, should present a cohesive campaign. Tip number 3 is to consider all parts of the canvas. So for example, if you're pressing vinyl, you're going to need the album cover, correct? But you're also going to need a spine. Well, let me show you what I mean. Here's my album cover. Shameless promotion. Who cares? Album cover. Then we have a spine. In my case, it's very narrow. Then we have the back cover. Then if you pull out the sleeves, sometimes it's a paper sleeve, sometimes it's a printed sleeve. And so you have that, both sides to contend with. You also can print on the inside. I haven't done it on this time. And then the vinyl, the color vinyl, obviously. And then there's the labels on the vinyl too, that both labels, side A and side B. So those are lots of canvases that you need to deal with. Here's the same album on CD, more shameless promotion. You have the front cover, you have the spine, you have the back cover, but this is a wallet. So you also open it up and you have the inside panels, disc art as well. Cassettes, you have J cards, you have the big fat spine, you have that panel around the back, you have the pad stamp. There's just so much to consider. I think it's really important that while you're picking your album cover, that you think about these last 2 tips, all of your deliverables, your merch, your social media posts and graphics, your web graphics, physical media and digital files that you're going to need, but also the canvases. Because if you pick a beautiful painting by a great artist, that's going to look great on the album cover, no doubt. But what are you going to do on the back cover? What are you going to do on the CD? Are you going to pay the artist to do individual paintings for each one of those? And then the cassette requires vertical artwork, and then each individual single requires its own artwork. So now all of a sudden, maybe that painter's dead, or that painter's going to be too expensive to do custom stuff. So now you hire a designer to create some sort of typography and imagery or colors that complement that painting. Things get really complicated. That's not to say you shouldn't use painting. What I'm just saying is that before you pick your album cover or the band picks their album cover, you should consult all these things. Just consider all of these different things you're going to need and just say, is this cool photograph going to work across all of the different canvases of this album? Tip number 4, please consider the aesthetic of the artist or the music when designing an album cover. I personally, you might disagree with this, let me know in the comments, but I personally think the album cover should match the music. just aesthetically. That might be a elusive thing, but I really think that a great summery bossa nova upbeat record should not have a snowy cabin on the front cover. That's just me. Am I wrong? No, I think I'm right. That's an extreme example, but there's like very traditional designs in the metal world, in the punk world, even in minimal neoclassical music. And I think true fans know that. And you need to consider, does this design aesthetic, does this album cover, will it resonate with the target audience? The people who are buying records in this genre, does this look like the type of record they'll buy? Do they even buy music on cassette? Why are you making cassettes if this genre isn't very common to have their music done on cassette? If this genre loves great vinyl, like metal, they do incredible packages with like super exotic color vinyl variants I've never seen before. If you're doing an album cover just for digital and you're not considering that some of the fans, a lot of the fans are going to want a really cool, well put together package, you're missing out. So make sure the album cover is a good representation of the music and that community. Tip number 5 is to hire a graphic designer. Listen, I think graphic designers do really great work, even though art is subjective. And you might be thinking, well, we have an idea, we don't need a graphic designer. Well, then in that case, I think what you need a graphic designer for is to just take your great idea and then to make it professional, to make sure that it meets all the requirements that Spotify and Apple Music have when it comes to resolution, that they're able to take your album cover and turn it into some cool social media graphics or web banners. And if you're printing vinyl, that they're using the manufacturer's template to take your artwork and design things like spine and record labels and all those things that are really important. I talked to a pressing plant one time and they said the number one holdup in a vinyl pressing process is artwork. It's not the music. It's not the vinyl itself. It's getting the art files and getting the band and the label and everybody on board and happy with how it looks. There's so many technical requirements. That's where I think a good graphic designer comes in. A huge shout out, by the way, funny little segue here, to today's sponsor, a small independent company that's owned by an independent record label owner that helps other labels and other artists manage all of their graphic design needs when it comes to promoting their music and promoting themselves as artists. They craft stuff like album covers that we're talking about, printed media templates, merch drops, EPKs, and artist websites. They all do it at an affordable rate and completely bespoke to you and your artist's needs. Check them out at the link in the description by going to echocreative.io, and thanks to them for sponsoring today's video. Tip number 6, this is my favorite tip. Start it early. Start this design process early. Why? Because if you're working with a band who has 5 different artists, they're going to have 5 different opinions, and then they're going to bring in their mom and their boyfriend and their girlfriend and their roommate who's also going to have opinions. And this whole process is going to take a long time. Everyone's going to have their own opinions. Even if you're dealing with one artist, if that artist has a hard time committing to something, this could really delay the album cover process. Maybe your graphic designer has a backlog of things. Maybe you print something and there's an error and you have to go back and fix it. That's why you should start this design process as early as possible. When? Let's do it during the recording process. When I have a new record written and I get into the studio and I start recording, I'm usually more than a year out from releasing the album. And that's when I'm starting to brainstorm ideas for an album cover. In fact, it's very common for me to print off album cover concepts and hang them in the studio while I'm working on the record so that that music aesthetic thing all comes together. Tip number 7, make sure your files are high res and the correct file types. What does that mean? Well, in digital, we use RGB, which stands for red, green, blue. It's a color mode that's backed by LED lights in your screen that makes things look really, really colorful and bright and vibrant. But when you translate those colors to CMYK, which is the color code in the print world, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, black, all of a sudden those big, vibrant, bright colors go from LED lights to just mixed inks, and things look muted and dull, and artists get upset and they say, what happened to my big, flashy Superman blue? It looks kind of purpley. This is why you need a designer to help you communicate between the digital and the physical world. Even in the digital world, they require super high resolution graphics because some people listen to their albums on Spotify or Amazon Music or YouTube Music on their TVs, like big, huge 80-inch TVs, and they want the artwork to look really sharp. And if you're printing, you've got to use your manufacturer templates to make sure your bleeds are right, your safe areas. It's a whole deal. Tip number 8, consider a record label template. What does that mean? Well, think about the actual labels for a second. Go back to Atlantic Records, go back to Columbia Records. You remember the Columbia label that was red? It says Columbia around it. They still use it today. Atlantic Records had like green on the top and orange on the bottom. Sun Records is the most common one that's like yellow and orange. It says Sun. There's 2 reasons I like this. Number 1, and you can do this for the album cover too. I'll give you an example in a second. But number 1, it has this like label-wide cohesive imagery to all of your releases. So in the way that we know a Columbia Records record or a Sun Records record, by seeing that label, we can draw that connection. Other people will be able to do that too with your releases. So that's why I like having a label design template. The other reason is that it's economical. There's a label I had on the podcast recently called Lohihi Records from Hawaii. And so they had this album cover that's just a black and white photo taken by a great photographer. And on the back, it's another photo. The spine is a singular color and then just the name of the artist on the spine. And then the back had the album credits, a little description about the album, the barcode, copyright, etc. That template was really minimal and really beautiful, and they hired a designer to do that template. Well, the next release came out, and all they did was change the photo, change the artist name, and the color on the spine changed as well. And so now this looks like kind of a library collection of releases. The cohesive branding to this label's releases is really cool. But not only that, they invested in this template by paying this artist whatever they paid them or this graphic designer in the first place. And then they probably only paid like a third of that initial cost to do the second release. I think it's a great way. Anyway, just consider that. You can do that like Coal Mine Records does with their hype stickers. You can do it just on the labels like Columbia and Atlantic, or you can do it with the whole album cover. Number 9 is test it on multiple applications. So what I do is when I'm working on an album, I throw my rough mixes into iTunes, and then whatever album cover I'm currently testing, I'll take that JPEG and add it to that album in iTunes so that when I'm walking around with my phone, I'm listening to these rough mixes, but I'm doing so with a bit of a track listing and the artist name, the album title, and the album cover. So I see what the fan is going to see at the end of the day by listening to my album in iTunes. It gives me a way to test out the album cover in real life applications. You could even take that 12-inch album cover and go to Staples or Kinko's or wherever, print that off and be like, okay, this is what it looks like when it's blown up to a vinyl size or a smaller 5x5 CD size. So the important thing is don't just look at it on the screen, look at it in multiple different ways. And finally, number 10 is don't ask for too much feedback. Okay, just don't ask for too much feedback. Why? Because it's just going to confuse you. And we really don't want to talk to the general public about artistic things. We just want to tell them. We are the artists here, folks. We're going to tell them what they're going to like. Here's the thing. If you ask for people's feedback, your parents, your boyfriend or your girlfriend, even people who are in the industry, they're going to feel obligated to provide feedback. So they're going to be kind of intentionally critical. Otherwise, they're going to look useless. And so people, when asked for their opinion, immediately have to form an opinion. Most people walk through a record store and we don't comment or give feedback on every single mix we hear or every single album cover we see. It's either great or it's not. Work together with the artists, work together with your graphic designer. Maybe there's another label or an artist that you really admire that you want to maybe get some feedback with. That's okay. But I don't run polls. I don't send my artwork out to people to get their feedback. In most cases, 99% of the time, people don't see my artwork at all until it's pressed on vinyl and I say, here it is. All of a sudden now they're like, this is cool. I hope you found those 10 tips helpful. Let me just say this, album artwork is really important. It's not that hard to do. Take some of these 10 tips and you're going to just ever so slightly or incredibly improve the overall look of your album releases. Don't underestimate your album cover, please. Go to otherrecordlabels.com/artwork. I have a bunch of resources you can download, including a Photoshop template for vinyl mockups. I also have a little workshop that teaches you how to have that cohesive branding look and feel for your entire album campaign. A lot of other resources that you can check out at otherrecordlabels.com/artwork. And thanks again to Echo Creative for sponsoring today's episode. Make sure you check them out in the link in the description below. Thanks for watching.